Welcome inside the School of Communications here at Quinnipiac University. I am Assistant Professor Nick Petroskevich, and this is the latest episode of What's Your Story? I am so happy to be joined by Villanova's Senior Associate Athletic Director for Strategic Communications, Dana O'Neill. Dana, thanks for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
So we've had a few of these episodes already. We've had Tim Kirkjian sat in that chair, Jimmy Roberts sat in that chair, and I've started each of these with the same question. Yours is going to be a little bit different because I asked them, what was the moment you decided you wanted to do this? But this has changed recently.
Right.
When was the moment you decided, I want to work in sports? I want that to be my professional life?
Yeah, people have heard this story. It's kind of a weird, long story. I'll try to give you like the short story. I went to college having no clue what I wanted to do, so I thought I was going to be a business major because I had a rich uncle, and I thought I too could be rich and be a venture capitalist, even though I didn't know what that was and still don't know. I took one economics course and realized that was not my future. But short story, a woman on my floor at Penn State was the RA named Jennifer Edwards, and she was on the Daily Collegian. And she said that they were looking for people to join the paper. I had zero journalism experience other than like calling in baseball scores in high school. But I was like, yeah, maybe I'll try it out. And I took a test. I had no idea what I was doing. Anyway, I got chosen for the Collegian. And I covered field hockey because I played field hockey, so write what you know. And I came home at Thanksgiving and told my parents I wanted to be a sports writer. I literally tripped into it.
How did they take that conversation? I want to be a sports writer.
I say to this day, like my parents, thank God that they were who they are because they didn't even blink. I think now in retrospect, when I think about it, my mother was a high school English teacher and my father was a massive, insane sports fan. So it kind of, and I used to like go with my dad to rec league softball and I would compute ERAs for a beer league team. Like I was in it. So it kind of made sense in retrospect. But yeah, they were like, oh, okay, that's great. Go do you. Like it did not, and this was like a long time ago when it wasn't sort of common, but it did not occur to them that I shouldn't. So good for them.
Well, that is good. They've all mostly heard this story of my two older brothers being basically a doctor, a lawyer, and then there's this guy. So that's the job that you have now. We'll get to in a minute.
Yeah.
But you worked at the Philadelphia Daily News, ESPN.com with a very successful editor at your side, and The Athletic. Do you ever look back? I know I do it often, and when I was at Augusta National or in a press box at Wrigley Field, and you look out and you're like, this is my office.
Yeah.
Do you have a specific moment or a specific place that you think about, and I can't believe that was or is my office? Yeah,
that happened all the time. Honestly, every year I would sit at the Final Four. After a few years of covering the Final Four, I kind of Jimmy rigged it so I could be the pool reporter. And the pool reporter is very rarely called into duty, but basically if something happens, if a ref makes a questionable call in the game, one reporter goes into the ref's locker rooms afterwards and gets the information. And I was like, well, that's kind of cool, because if something bad happens, I'm going to want to be there. But the best part about it was it's mid-court between the two benches. So, they play these on the elevated, so I would sit like from me to, the benches, and every year I would get the chills. So all the time, I always talk about seeing American Pharoah coming around to win the Triple Crown and break that, and I'm like, this is insane. Like, what am I doing? Yeah, it's a silly, ridiculous privilege to be able to sit there and say, I'm getting paid to do this. And I don't have to go whatever. I just sit at a game, and yeah, it happened regularly. I never lost that, ever, not once.
So a few months ago, I guess it would be, you decided to walk away from that part of your professional life.
Great.
And into something entirely new. Can you walk us through that process?
Yeah, I think it was just one of those things. I had covered college sports and college basketball and whatever for 30 years. And my last thing on my bucket list was to do the Olympics, and I went to Paris, and that was awesome. And Villanova is a place that I knew because I covered them for such a long time, and they had kind of crafted this position working with people that were familiar on a campus that I was about. And it was just kind of like it was like a new way to use the same brain, and I felt like maybe I was getting, not stale, but you kind of get in that rut where I didn't want to ever go through the motions and do my job. Because you have to really care about it and do it well, and I felt like I was getting dangerously close to going through the motions. And so when they came to this opportunity, I was like, well, that's kind of cool, because it's still storytelling, still the same stuff, but it's other stuff. It's house settlement nonsense and alumni, and it's a bigger job. So it seemed like a good time to try something new.
Was there any fear in walking away
Oh,
from
God.
something that the only thing you'd
Yeah.
ever really done professionally?
Yeah, tons. Like I was like it was off, like, back and forth, in and out. I remember in Paris, randomly, the last thing I was covering was skateboarding, which I know nothing about. So there you go. I'm on a train to go cover skateboarding at the Olympics, because who wouldn't? And I knew in my head that was gonna be the last thing I covered, and nobody else knew that except like one of my good friends. And I like was on the train sobbing, and I called him like, oh, blah, 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 and he's just like, breathe, you'll be fine. So there's tons of terror, because like it's not only what I did, it was who I am. Like I'm a sports writer.
Yeah.
So it becomes part, whether that's healthy or not, it's part of your identity. So yeah, there was definitely some, wow, this is scary. But you know what? Like I think also, no matter what you do, even if you're a sports writer for 35, 50 years, however long, you got to find new ways to challenge yourself, to reinvigorate yourself,
Yes.
to make it not boring and stale, to not be the person sitting at the Final Four, be like, oh my God, like I cannot, this game is starting so late. Like I never wanted to be that person. So you always have to kind of like reinvigorate yourself.
Did you find, so I left ESPN 3 years ago to do this, and I love doing this. And I love the people sitting in front of us mostly. But was there anybody, because I got this, it was like, you're leaving ESPN to go be a professor. Did you get anybody who asked you, are you out of your damn mind?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, yeah, right up to my own self. Like, yeah, a lot of people ask me that question because, yeah, I had a great job at The Athletic. They do amazing storytelling. I had kind of gotten where I wanted to go, but I also was just kind of like, well, right, like that's great, but who decides like what the next step is, right? Like yeah, of course I had those questions. I had those questions when I left the Daily News. I had those questions, going to The Athletic when it wasn't even a thing yet. Like, are you crazy? You're going to something that doesn't even exist. So I think you just have to believe that challenge is good and not to be afraid of it. So, yeah.
How's the old job help the new job?
Oh, well, I mean, storytelling is storytelling is storytelling. And that's what I've come to find out. Like, when you are on a campus of people who aren't storytellers, and it's not their fault, that's just not what they do, they don't see what's right in front of them. And we as reporters, as communication people, as journalists, see things that we can help the university, help the athletic department. I was telling Nick, when I was getting shown around Villanova, I went in the football office, and I met this receptionist, and her name is Joan. Joan is 90. Joan has been with the Villanova football team. She started in 1976. The team stopped competing for a while. They relocated Joan. The team came back, and Joan went back to work with the football team. She's 90, and no one has ever written about Joan. I'm like, oh, excuse me? Like, wait, what? Like that? Like, oh, well, it's just Joan. I'm like, no. Like, Joan is like the epicenter of the football team. She's the first person you see when you walk in, and she is very obviously representative of what Villanova is as an institution. It's a place where they value you, and so I was like, and nobody saw that, right? So like as storytellers, our brains think differently, so there are stories all over the place. It doesn't matter where you are, there's always a story to tell if you can find it.
I've sort of stressed to them that the job in storytelling is to take an audience where they can't go themselves. Yeah. How do you
Always.
define what a storyteller is or should be?
Yeah, I think that's evolved, right? Like as the business has evolved, like with so much access now to everything, games on television, highlights on YouTube, social media, right? Everybody knows what's happened. If you're a fan of a team, odds are you know the score, you know who scored the most points, et cetera, et cetera. So your job is no longer to tell the story of the game. The game story, as it used to be, is kind of dead. Your job now is to do exactly what you said. Take people where they can't go or they don't have access. Explain to them what it looks like. I always tell students, your best source are your own eyes and your own ears. Write what you see and hear when you're at a game that nobody else can. I used to always keep a notebook and I kept running stats, but it wasn't just like Poplar elbow jumper. It was like Poplar elbow jumper, Neptune punches air, Bunch stands up and screams, right? Like it's all of that scene that you're seeing. So to me, that's the essence of storytelling. It's taking people to see things that they can't see, that you have access to because you have a credential on that the person sitting home does not.
How's the business evolved in the time you've been a part of it?
Tons. I mean, I'm like older than dirt, so it's evolved a lot. But
Going there.
no, but like, yeah, I mean, it's that's the change, right? Is that everybody knows what happened, so how can you differentiate yourself, right? You're sitting at a game and there's 5 reporters, 10 reporters, 20 reporters, whatever there is. Everybody already knows what happened. Why do people want to read what you have to say? So going behind the scenes definitely has evolved. Obviously, the use of social media, the use of the concept of, I was a print journalism major because back in the day, that's what you were. You were a writer or you were a broadcaster, and neither the twain shall meet, right? Now, you do all of it. You have to be a podcaster. You have to be a social media maven. You have to be a reporter. You have to be a writer. You have to be a broadcaster. So that, but it's still the same stuff. Like, that's to me the difference. It's like, you get lost in the weeds of it. It's still telling the story. So it's evolved a lot. Some ways for the better, some ways less, I would argue, but it's definitely changed.
How many, when you started, how many women were working in sports? Not just as a reporter, but as an SID, as coaches, as administrators?
Not many.
And how has that changed?
Not as well as it should have.
Right.
My mother used to always say, you know, usually the cameras are behind reporters because they're facing the benches, right? And we're opposite the benches at a basketball game. My mother used to be always like, I could always find you because you were the only one with long hair because there was no other women on press row. And it's still better. It's better. It's still not great. Like, I was sitting here thinking to myself, like, so with all the stuff with, you know, house settlement in college athletics and revenue sharing and Title IX endangerment, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, but all the people making the decisions, all 90% of the athletic directors, almost all of the power conference commissioners are white dudes. Who's looking out for women because they still haven't gotten up there yet, right? And it's still the same. Like, there are definitely more women, but I often go to places like this and I see this crew of women at a college journalism program, and then I go to press row at the Final Four. I'm like, where'd they all go? Like, why aren't they here? How come they? And I know it's hard, but like, where'd they all go? So yeah, it's not as good as it should be.
How can it? It has to and needs to get better. How can it?
Well, I hope, and it shouldn't be this way. Let me preface for say, like, it should not be gender specific, but I do hope that the rise of women's athletics and the coverage of it, opens up more jobs, more things need to be covered, and that the people need to take women in this job seriously, who, whatever, you know, knuckle draggers still exist in that space, will recognize that, take women seriously, right? They belong here. So I hope that will help. I think it's just also, you know, it's hard. And I think that's part of it's hard to be a woman. It's hard to do this job, period. It's really hard to do this job as a woman. I would tell everybody, I would think so hard about every single piece of clothing I would wear to go to a game. Like, God forbid I wear a green dress when I'm going to cover a Michigan State game, like accidentally wear green. God forbid my dress looks like it's too short. God forbid I run into a coach at a bar and he sits down and says, hey, let's chat. And that's a good thing to do, right? And then how are people going to perceive that? Social media is the single worst place on earth to be a female sports journalist. I have muted more people, I've muted and or blocked more people than I follow. So you really do have to have a love and a dedication to get through all the nonsense. And that's hard. And I get why people get fed up. It's hard. It's really, really hard.
Did you get to a point where you're just like, screw it, I'm going to do my job,
I don't
and
care.
if people perceive it a certain
Yeah.
way, I don't give a
Definitely.
insert curse word here?
Yeah, and as you are younger, right, like, that's scarier. The older you get, the more you care less. But yeah, I mean, I would just get kind of annoyed and flippant and sarcastic in response to stuff, which is sort of my go-to. So like, somebody would say, like, how'd you get the job at ESPN? I'm like, well, you know, like, what do you mean? Like, right? Like, so yeah, I used to care, like, if I ran into, like, I can remember seeing Bill Self in Vegas for an AAU tournament, and he was at the bar, and I remember thinking, God, if I sit there, what are people gonna think? And I'm like, I don't care. Like, I know what I'm doing, Bill Self knows what I'm doing, my husband knows what I'm doing. Those are literally the only 3 people that matter. So you do get to that point where you don't care, but it's hard, but you have to get there. And it comes with time and reps and your own reputation. And I tell everybody, no matter male, female, whatever, the most important thing that you will ever type as a reporter is buy and insert name here, because that's your reputation and that's your credibility. And as soon as that's gone, you're done. So that's the most important thing that you will ever write, is whatever your name, by, because you have to be responsible good, bad, or indifferent for what's beneath it, and how people perceive you absolutely matters. And I will say, like, you never know. I always wanted to be respected. I didn't care if I was liked.
Yep.
When I got let go at ESPN, I had many coaches text me and said, the business is worse off without you. And that made me feel like, all right, well, if I never do this again, at least I did it right.
What was I don't think I've ever asked you this, and you don't have to answer it. What was that like? I know what it was like on my end of it, which sucked.
Yeah, not good.
What was that like?
Yeah, so, backstory, everyone knew this was like D-Day at ESPN. They were going to lay off a bunch of people. Nobody knew who it was. I was sitting at my kitchen counter. My phone rang. It was an 860 area code. I'm like, well, I'm up. And unfortunately, the person who called me to tell me that was not a person I liked at all. I couldn't stand, frankly. And so in the course of the conversation, they started to like read through all the here's what you're going to have to do, and here's your HR stuff. And I literally said, stop. I said, I just got laid off. I'm not going to hear a word you say. I'm going to hang up the phone, and any and all communication you want to have with me from now on is via writing. Do not call me back. And then the weird part was I was going to New York that night to meet some friends, Chuck Culpepper from the Washington Post and Pat Forty from wherever he was from now he's at Sports Illustrated. Anyway, for drinks in New York, and I called my husband, and I'm like, I'm supposed to go to New York. What should I do? He's like, you know what? They'll help you way more than I do. Get on the train, go see your friends. And then the worst part was, honestly, as bad as I felt, once I got to New York City, my phone rang, and it was like 6:30 at night by then, so we thought the layoffs were over. And Andy Katz, who I adored and who was like the most loyal ESPN employee ever, and who brought me to ESPN, called me and literally whispered, they got me. And I was like angrier for Andy than I was for myself. So it's demoralizing because everybody knows about it. Even though you know you didn't do anything wrong, and it wasn't your quality of writing, you can't help but think, but why was it me and not him and not her? I must have done this. I must not be as good as I think I am because they think I'm expendable. So it's awful. And I try to remember that, or I tried to remember that when I was talking, coaches on the hot seat and stuff. I'm like that's a real thing. Like, that's someone's reputation. That's someone's family. That's like, we all do it. Like, that's part of the job. But I do know how awful that feels, and I try to process that as a reporter.
Did the athletic and the run there rekindle your
Oh, God, it was
love
the best
for
thing
it?
I ever did, yeah. Yeah, the fact that two guys who knew nothing about sports writing saved sports writing is my favorite story of all time. Two tech dudes who couldn't put two sentences together, like, hey, let's do this. And it worked. Yeah, because not only, well, first of all, they were so collaborative and helpful. Seth Davis, who I worked with, used to say I had ESPN PTSD because I was not used to people being nice to me and complimentary, not you, but others, to preface that. Yeah, and they were so into writing and storytelling and long form and all the stuff that everyone at ESPN was telling us nobody cared about anymore. That was awesome. And we were flying by the seat of our pants, which is kind of fun too for a little while.
What's the most fun you've ever had doing this job, or any of even if it's happened in the last few months? What's the most fun you've ever had? Because I tell these students that I have now and in the past is really haven't worked a real job in my life.
Yeah.
I've had a ton of fun along the way, even if there's been headaches at ESPN
of course,
or wherever.
always.
But what's the most fun you've ever had?
I mean, there's so many ways to answer that, right? I can think of single events that were the coolest event I've been at and how I felt in that moment. Honestly, I think the most fun I ever have in this job is the same always and over. It's the game is over and a bunch of reporters sit together and kind of rehash what we talked about. And I don't know, that to me, it's such a little simple moment. We were in Paris this year, and I was covering gymnastics, and Steven Nedorosik, the pommel horse guy, happened. And this is how the world is so small, right? So I'll bore you. Steven Nedorosik went to Penn State. I went to Penn State. When I was on the Collegiate, I covered men's gymnastics. The assistant coach at the time was a guy named Randy Jepson, who is also now the men's gymnastics head coach. He coached Steven Nedorosik. I did not have Randy Jepson's phone number, but I had run into a gymnast. This is such a long story. I had run into a gymnast that I know at a Penn State football tailgate, had his number from Paris. I text Rob, hey, can you put me in touch with Randy? He puts me in touch with Randy. I get Randy on the phone. Randy tells me why Steven wears glasses, that he has a degenerative eye condition that nobody knew about at the time. Oh. So I put that in my story, but my editor's well, we can't just do this without his permission. So then I have to call USA Gymnastics. They're like, well, Steven's at an after party right now. So they kind of last 11th hour called me like, hey, we got him. He's cool. You can run with it. And by then we're all sitting like a Paris bar trying to wait for the story to publish. And I got the okay, and we were so excited. And it's like, that was so cool. Like, that was so
awesome.
cool. And that's not like a big deal, but it was like, that's like the cool part of the job.
So you've, for far too many years than we both want to admit, have had to listen to me.
Yep.
So I'm going to let them talk now. So they can hit you with all kinds of questions that they have. Pete, are they just asking questions, or do we have a mic we're using? Just how would you prefer to roll? Who wants to start?
Be brave.
Hello.
Start with your name.
Hi.
Hi.
My name's Zach Carter.
Nice to
I
meet you.
wanted to say thank you for being here. And you being here is a reflection of a successful writer-editor relationship.
Yep.
From your perspective, for us.
Wait, hang on. Are you sure you agree with that before he continues with this question? Sorry, go ahead.
From your perspective,
Day-to-day.
for people like us trying to break into the industry, what are your keys for building that relationship?
Yeah, so I think too many people, look, I think every writer is very possessive of their baby, which is their story, right? And it's very personal, and it has, like, when I write, there's a rhythm in my head that I can hear, so when someone comes in and changes my rhythm, I get very possessive and defensive and all of that. I will say, though, I think I would never not want to have an editor. I don't trust myself. I think the most important thing you have to do is understand that they are here to help you, to make you better, that they are not trying to, any questions they have are probably questions that the reader would have, and that if you don't answer them, you're doing your story a disservice. I think it's conversation, it's understanding that it's not being afraid to stand up for what you really want to fight for, but understand you can't fight for everything, like pick your fights. I mean, one of my first editors, I was really lucky right out of college. I worked at a crummy little newspaper in Trenton, and he would line edit my stories word for word and get me so much better. And that was such a gift to have that as a young reporter. So I think you have to understand that they are there to help you. And if you have a real strong feeling, don't be afraid to share, but don't share it in a way that's like, you're wrong. It's got to be like, listen, this is why I wrote this. Can we talk about it? And if you have the grace of time, which you don't always on deadline, talk through it. But yeah, I think I've had great editors, and I get really kind of, people who get really nasty about editors, I think are wrong. I just think, like, you really want to self-publish? Go for it. Like, I wouldn't want to do that.
Right. I think, and I've mentioned this before, I think in the 14 years when I was at ESPN as an editor, we probably disagreed more than anybody, but it was productive disagreement.
Yeah.
I've had unproductive disagreements with reporters, and it would end in arguments, and either the story wouldn't get published or it would go to other people, and they would try to go around, we'd try to go around each other's back or whatever. Like, Dana and I always had great conversations, and we often disagreed, but we got to a common place where I think it was the story in the end benefited from it.
Yeah, and I also think I mean, I've been doing this a really, really long time, and I still don't think I'm great at it. Like, I still can get better, right? Like, so that's what my editor's job is to make me better, right? So why wouldn't you want that backstop?
Tyler, behind you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tyler Platts.
Nice to meet you.
When assigned a topic that you're not an expert in, skateboarding, what's your process for familiarizing yourself with the topic?
So it's funny that you say that, because I remember, so I was covering gymnastics. That was my primary beat at Paris. And I remember my editor told me, I'm like, right. So that'd be like handing college basketball to somebody, be like, how do you pronounce K-R-Z-Y-Z-E-W-S-K-I?
Petroskevich.
Right. Like, why would you want me to cover like the biggest thing there is? But lucky me. And I thought, you know what? Like, two things. First, do your homework. I read and read and read and read. I called Nancy Armour, who works for USA Today, who's covered gymnastics, and said, listen, I think I understand the scoring system, but can you, like, don't be afraid to admit that you don't know something. Like, you're not supposed to know everything. You can't be a specialist in all sports. If you are, God bless you. So don't be afraid to ask for help from other people who are. Read a lot. But I also think, and this is how I kind of approach gymnastics, my ignorance, if you will, I think was my asset, because the common reader does not know the name of like what Simone Biles is doing with the Biles 2. Like if I explained it to you in words, they would have no idea what that meant. And if I put all those words in there, they'd be like glossing over it. So I didn't. And here's a great example of my ignorance, back to Stephen Nedorosik. Like the men's gymnastics team wins a team bronze, which for the first time in forever, they win a team medal. And that was a really, really big deal. Of course. And so a lot of the gymnastics writers flock to, not incorrectly in my mind, but whatever, flock to the older gymnasts who had been part of the process and who had never won medals. And so they're all over here. I'm like, well, I'm going to go talk to the dude with the glasses because I think this is more interesting. And you know what? It was. More people read about Stephen Nedorosik and the guy who had to do one thing last and hit it, and that was the story. So I think in that situation, my ignorance saved me from. It's like I saw it from a much broader perspective than the people sitting right in the, like you can get like insider baseball too much. But don't be afraid to ask questions and just read. And listen, sometimes too, I tell people all the time, don't be afraid when you're interviewing somebody to ask them a question. Like, can you explain that? Like, I'm sorry, I am not an expert in whatever sport, skateboarding. Like, I don't, well, and you know what? They're very gracious. Like, they'd rather you that than act like you're a know-it-all. Sure. And I don't know anything about skateboarding to this day. Like, don't fall. It's like right, like gymnastics, figure skating, skateboarding, like skiing. Like, don't fall down.
I got sent to the X Games.
Yeah, I mean.
No earthly idea what I was doing there.
No.
But I figured it out. But.
Right, exactly. So yeah, I think sometimes but I do think sometimes it's to your advantage because you see things from almost like a naive, wide open way that other people wouldn't. You're welcome.
Ben?
Hi, Dan.
Hi.
My name's Ben. My question for you is, how did you navigate a professional relationship either with an editor and a source when you did not like that person?
So, I mean, I will say most of my, well, that's not true. There's a couple. Most of my editors I did like. But again, I think, like, first of all, your editor is your boss, right? So there's always that bit of situation. There are a couple of coaches that I did not necessarily love and did not love me back. And that's fine. I think you have to, I think in those situations you really need to be especially prepared because their a source's fallback when they don't trust you is to be very defensive and to not want to give you information and freeze you out. So I think you really have to be prepared with good questions. I think you need to navigate. You know, like it's more, it wasn't even sources that I didn't like, it would be subjects that didn't want to talk to me, right? Like we did an investigation at the Athletic involving the Syracuse women's basketball program. And we got to the point where we were ready to publish and the vice president of communications was not really excited to talk to me. And I got called a lot of names on the phone because we were giving him 3 hours to answer because that's how it works. And so it was really antagonistic. And I was just like, this is how you just kind of just stand your ground in that situation. Look, this is what we're doing. Don't shoot the messenger. Like we're gonna do this whether you like it or not. And then, but back to the editor relationship, my editor in that situation had my back because that was the VP's thing, of course, was trying to like, let me talk to your boss. I'm like, sure, go talk to George, he's gonna tell you the same thing. So yeah, I think you need to kind of be prepared for the defensive and understand that you might not get great answers. But again, here's the thing, like if you're dealing with a source and they don't like you and they give you really crummy answers and you can't really use them, read their body language and write their body language, right? Sitting there with his arms crossed, looking angry. He didn't say anything, but I can describe how he felt because he didn't say it, but I can see it. And that's what, and he didn't need to tell me that he was angry that whatever happened. I can see it in his face. So there your eyes and ears come in handy too.
Those little tells are so important when you're doing an interview, which is why I've always hated phone interviews. If you can see the person, see their eyes light up, you see them get uncomfortable in their chair, you know there's more thread to pull at, and that's how you end up getting a story that's differentiating from the person that's 5 feet away doing similar reporting. And
I'm sure Nick has told you 1,000 times your 2 favorite questions are why and how. That's it. And just why until they get tired of you. And how.
I have that, and Tom Rinaldi zoomed in here once a couple of years ago and left with 3 lasting questions that work in any situation, according to Tom Rinaldi, who I think is pretty good at this, is what was the high point? What was the low point? What happened next?
Yeah, yeah, there you go.
Who's next? Cam?
Hi, Dan.
Hi.
I'm Cameron Lavasser. My question to you is, what's a story that you've always wanted to write but never got the chance to?
Wow. Actually, this is really funny. I'm not always wanted to write, but this is my new thing that I want to know about. So I live outside of Philly, right? You know how they grease the poles in Philly? I want to know where the grease comes from. Honest to God.
Oh, wow. That's a good question.
And I think just even writing a story that doesn't necessarily come to an answer, but it takes me on the hunt for the grease. Like, I want to know if there's a warehouse in South Philly that is labeled championship grease. I want to know, honest to God, this is awful and disgusting, but I want to know if like the area strip clubs donate stuff. I want to know if somebody has to go to Crisco
God.
and just buy Crisco vats at Costco. And I want to know where it comes from. So it's not the always story I've wondered, but that's currently on my brain. Otherwise, I don't know. Like I said, there were things that I wanted to cover. Like I still would love to cover Wimbledon. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's more like what event have I not seen that I want to tell that story. But
That's the last one left on my big I haven't been to bucket
Yeah.
list is center court at Wimbledon.
yeah, like I could have gone to Roland Garros when I was at the Olympics, but I just because that was the Olympic site was at the French Open site, but I physically couldn't get there. But yeah, I mean, there's probably subjects out there that I find very intriguing, but I don't know why I'm thinking about the grease, but I'm thinking about the grease.
Yeah, I didn't have grease and stripper pole and any of that on my bingo card for today's conversation.
There you go.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
didn't quite see that one coming.
Now aren't you intrigued?
Yeah,
Right? Like somebody has to go
100%.
find the grease, and it's a lot of grease because there's a lot of poles on Broad Street. There are.
Who's next?
Sorry.
Tony,
it's a
save
good
us.
question.
Hi again, I'm Tony. If you were sitting in one of these chairs right now, what advice would you want to hear knowing what you know now about
Yeah.
this industry?
For sure. I think 2 things. One, be patient with yourself. I think everybody is in a hurry to, I don't even know, like, how do I get to ESPN? How do I do this? Like, I never cared. Like, I just did the job in front of me and tried to do it really, really well. Don't worry about if your best friend has got an internship at MLB.com and yours is at like some small newspaper. It's not a race. It's not a competition. In fact, sometimes the smaller opportunities are better than the big ones because you'll be asked to. I had an internship in Trenton, New Jersey, and I covered Little League Baseball and then the Yankees. So, you know, don't worry. Don't be in a hurry all the time. And don't be afraid when you're young to make mistakes as long as you're willing to own up to them, because that's when you're supposed to do that. Find someone that will help you and mentor you. I have a mentor to this day, Dick Girardi, who I work with at the Daily News. I ask him about everything and anything. I very rarely make decisions without him. But really don't beat yourself up about, oh my God, like I'm not there yet. I don't even know where there is supposed to be. Like just take your time, exhale, and really, again, your first name, your last name, and what's beneath it. Be able to put your head on the pillow at night and say, "What I stand by what I produced. Like, it's true, it's accurate. It might not be like you're not gonna love every word you write, but I'm pretty proud of that." And onward. And if you can't do that, then don't publish it.
Hi, Dan. My name's Connor Core. So you talked about going from the athletic to working with Villanova. With so much changing in college athletics, why did you think it was a good idea to take a job in college
Crazy.
athletics?
Yeah, good question. I ask myself that on a daily. Honestly, because I thought as messy and complicated as it is, that being able to look at it as I do as more of an outsider than an insider, I think is helpful. I think, within the college athletic department, you can get pretty insulated to what is being perceived outside of it and what's next and how to navigate it. And I thought I could be valuable there to help people navigate all of that. And I still maybe naively believe that this is all going to shake down to be less chaotic. Like we're in the weeds of it right now. I think in 3 years it'll calm down a little. But I thought that my outside perspective was going to be helpful to people on the inside because you kind of can't, and I've seen that already, honestly, small things and major things. We had a player that was late to practice and the coach didn't want to start him and he didn't know if he should put a press release out. And I was like, well, yeah. He's like, well, why? I said, because in the absence of information, there's disinformation. Somebody will assume something worse happened. So just say it. And he's like, well, what if they think like that means the kid's walking over them? I'm like, no, like you disciplined him. That's a good thing, right? Like there's a lot that, I'm like, trust me, as a reporter, if you told me that, I'd be like, oh, who cares, whatever. But if you just suspended him, I'd be like, ooh, what'd he do? You know? So I feel like that was sort of part of it. I don't know if that answers you entirely.
So he rolled in here with a Penn State sweatshirt on.
I know.
Now he's handing it to the person wearing the Villanova sweatshirt.
Sure.
I'm Ethan. This is going to be completely out of left field.
That's okay.
During your reporting career, what was the process of writing obituaries, especially for someone that has more to their career, like O.J. Simpson, Pete Rose, and how do you sort of weigh that?
It's really funny that you asked that because I had to write Jerry Tarkanian's obituary ahead of time, and my son was pretty little, and every once in a while he'd be like, that guy died yet? And I'd be like, oh my God, no, Kieran, he's still alive. Yeah, I did one for Lou Carnesecca recently. So I think in some of those, you can do one of two things. You can use like a website like newspapers.com is my favorite rabbit hole, and you can go and find old quotes and things like that and kind of stuff it in with that. If you have to include live interviews, you have two choices. You can either tell the person you're talking to, look, someday, hopefully not in a really long time, this person's going to pass. We want them to be remembered properly. Can you just help me navigate why this person is important? Or you can ask them very broad questions about like what their impact was that you can then fold into the story. It's weird. I mean, it really is weird. It's necessary because the last thing, I mean, sometimes things happen you can't be prepared for terribly, but if you can be prepared, it's just, it makes the site that you're working for so much better. But I think, like I said, finding old quotes from because that's what's relevant anyway. I mean, your story should encapsulate why they were impactful anyway. You can have someone tell you why they were impactful, but if you've written it properly, it's self-evident, right? Like why is this person important? So I think going back into old files and stuff like that, finding fun stories. I think obituaries are really good when they tell people something about someone super famous that they didn't really even remember or know or forgot about. Like for Louis Carnesecca, I was trying to like go back to the sweater game. I had written a book on the Big E, so I had a lot of material to work with. So there's a lot of things you can mine, but it's weird. It's weird. Like my son was, I don't know, maybe like, I want to say he was little, maybe like 10 or whatever, but honestly, every like couple of months, that guy died yet? Oh God, no.
That was always the strangest conversations I had with people who didn't do this for a living.
Correct.
Wait, how did, the reason the story got published like 30 seconds after someone dies, like we don't write that fast.
Yeah.
Like this was done in advance and these are uncomfortable. My wife would never, that was the part she's like, that is the weirdest thing that you do is you're planning, I'm literally having an obituary meeting tomorrow. And I don't know if it was even more complicated for her because she was a nurse and so having that conversation, but it's strange.
Well, and I mean, here's the thing, I had since left The Athletic and Louis died and there was like, bedlam, and they were like, who wrote the Louis? And I just like emailed my friends like, the Louis obit's written, don't worry. Like it's I don't know where you guys got it filed, but I wrote it. If you can't find it, I have a Google Doc somewhere. So that was kind of weird.
Yeah, and I mean some of those sit in a drawer for years.
Hopefully, yeah.
And then some of them are I won't say athletes that I know that obituaries exist, but they're people that you don't think, and they're in their 30s and 40s and 50s that some of them have probably already been written.
Yeah. It's weird. And it's like who rises to that level is a really weird conversation, right? Like who's good enough to write in it's weird.
Yeah. Amanda?
Hi, I'm Amanda. Did you ever get to a point where like you didn't know if this was what you wanted to keep doing, and if so, what did you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's partially what made me move to Villanova, right? Like I was like, I kind of got to the point where I was like, I think I need a career pivot. And I will say, like early in my career, 100 years ago, I worked at Rider College for a little while doing alumni magazine, stuff like that. And I realized pretty quickly that that was a mistake. Like I just, I like to write. Writing, like in a weird way, relaxes me. I mean, it's not relaxing, but I can just get lost in it. And I like talking to people, and I like finding out what makes them tick. I love going to live events and stuff like that, but if my job was just to sit around and talk to people in a whatever setting and write stories that weren't at a live event, I'd be perfectly content, because I like that part of storytelling, is what makes people tick. So yeah, I mean, I think I've tried different things because I wasn't sure, but at the end of the day, like, I don't have a whole lot of skills, but I can write words, so that seemed to be my safe spot, so I've kind of stuck in it.
Hi, my name's Khalees Harris. You took a big step of faith leaving being a writer to administration. Can you just give us some words of advice, especially since we're still like young in college, about change and being uncomfortable?
Yeah, it's scary, right? Like, uncomfortable is scary, and someday you're going to get your first job, and that's going to be scary and uncomfortable. And any new job, whether it's in the field that you're doing, is because everybody does things differently. Everyone's got different bosses, different methods, right? It's always scary and uncomfortable. I think, though, the way you have to look at it is, like, that's what makes you better, is when you learn to deal with different structures and different people and different methodologies and use your skill set in different ways, it makes you better at what you're doing, no matter what. Like, I'm a better person for having written long form at The Athletic. I'm a better person for having covered Little League at the Trentonian, right? Like, I learned how to interview people and keep my own stats, because nobody keeps Little League stats, right? So yeah, being uncomfortable is scary, but it actually, if you use it as an opportunity to learn, which I think that's the most important thing. Like I said, I'm still learning, and I don't want to like lose that. So I think if you look at it, everything like that as an opportunity to learn, and when you do make the change, no matter what, understand, like, again, it's okay to say to people, I don't know what I'm doing, can you help me? Like, that's okay. People are afraid to admit that they don't know something. Like, we're all supposed to be experts in everything. No, we're not. Like, how do you get better if you don't say, I need some help? And that could be from all different perspectives. Like I said, I have my mentor, Dick Girardi, and my best friend in the business is Pat Forty. And Pat and I have not worked in the same place in a long time. And he reads a lot of my stories, and I read a lot of his before publication because I trust him, right? I want to get better. So I think that's how you have to look at any kind of change. It's an opportunity to learn, but don't be afraid to don't feel like you have to walk in as the world's biggest authority on whatever it is you're doing from day one. No, that's unreasonable. I mean, nobody at Villanova thought I know some stuff, but I didn't know how to do a lot of things, and they were very helpful.
Other questions? Oh, you got it, Jake? Go ahead.
I'm Jake.
Hi, Jake.
My interest in college sports is largely through, this is football too, the personalities of the coaches. I know in recent years we've seen a lot of the legends of the sport, particularly in basketball, including at the school you work at, retire.
Mm-hmm.
I know Izzo's still around. I know Self's still around. I know Dan Hurley is really building up his profile. But in regards to the personalities of coaches, do you think there's going to be that next group of Hurley's generation and younger that comes up, or with the advent of media training or the desperation to get to the pros, we're kind of losing the real character of the coaches?
Yeah, I think it's the next generation always comes up. I mean, I'm sure somebody sat around here, when Tom Izzo and Mike Krzyzewski and Jim Boeheim were getting started, saying, "Oh, this next generation's going to stink," right? They usually come up. I will say it's probably less media training than it is money and fear of screwing up that prohibits coaches from being as demonstrative and loud or whatever and opinionated as they used to be, right? Like there's a fear of getting fired. Like the people you talked about, Dan Hurley can be himself because he's got 2 national championships and he's got job security. Tom Izzo has job security. Bill Self has job security. So when you're a young coach, it's like a young reporter, right? Like you're worried that you're going to say something wrong and get yourself in hot water. To me, that falls as much on the administration as it does on the coach. Like if they believe in you and have your back, you should be safe. But yeah, we could get a little bit more generic and boring, but I don't know. I feel like I said, I feel like everyone says that and they always still deliver. I mean, some things are not, like the crazy stuff that John Chaney threatening to kill John Calipari, probably not going to happen again. But I still think the college sports, the coaches are still the personalities because they last longer, for better or worse. But certainly there's definitely a different professionalism, demeanor probably in this generation than there was the one before and then the one before that. Like I think we're getting a little bit more boring, but there's always somebody. I mean, Rick Pitino still exists.
He's never going away. We have time for like one or two more, or we can just go to Ethan. Or Connor's got one, and then Ethan with his usual closer question.
Uh-oh, I don't like a closer question.
So you've only been in your new role
Yep.
at Villanova for a couple months now, but have you ever gotten that itch to try to get back in and tell stories outside of the strategic communications?
Absolutely. I mean, of course, because that's what I did for a bunch of years. I'm very grateful that The Athletic is letting me freelance the Kentucky Derby because I love covering horse racing. That's a little bit weird, but I do. So that will like help. And so yeah, like it's like I'm doing stories for Villanova, but it's different, right? Like it's smaller, it's a little bit, and it's the audience is obviously a lot smaller. So yeah, it's definitely been like an itch that I feel like I might need to scratch every once in a while. I did keep alive when I got laid off at ESPN. I started to freelance for a magazine called Real Woman Magazine, and I never stopped. So I still do that, and those are all kinds of stories. I'm talking to Kate Fagan, who's a novelist and former sports writer. I'm doing a story on her, and I'm doing a story on a field hockey coach at a Division III school, and I'm doing a story on a judge. So like that's kind of cool. So I feel like I can't not, And if I could find a book, I would be really excited, but I just haven't figured out what that book is yet.
Ethan, don't worry. This is not going to be if you had to choose between Snoopy or Springsteen.
No, good.
Because that would be a question
No, I
I
couldn't
know
do
you
it.
cannot answer.
I cannot answer.
Okay.
If you had to open up your phone and pull out your contact list, who would be the coolest person in your contact list? And then you can interpret cool.
He loves this question.
You can interpret cool however you want.
Well, I don't know if his phone number is still right, though. Like, that's the thing. I have Steph Curry's number in there. I'm not sure if it's still accurate.
You could text him now.
No. Hi, I'm in a journalism class. Oh, gosh. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I think that's the one thing, like, when you get into this stuff, like, people that I think are cool are not that big of a deal to me anymore. Like, is it cool that I can text Mike Krzyzewski or Dan Hurley? Probably not to me, but I don't know.
So in your eyes right now, who would you say is the coolest person?
God, I don't know.
I thought you were going to go Jay Wright.
Well, he's not. But see, that's what I mean. Like, to me, Jay Wright's not that cool. I've known Jay Wright for 30 years. Who cares? That's what I mean, like the eye and the beholder. Probably Steph, if it's still accurate. Are there other ABI guys on there? Kyle Lowry, but like, is Kyle Lowry important? I don't think so. I've known him forever. Oh, here you go. Jalen Brunson. But again, I don't think that's that cool. But a lot of other people will think Jalen Brunson's pretty cool, right? But I don't. Like, I've known Jalen Brunson since he was 18. So does that count? There you go, Jalen Brunson.
There you go.
How many Springsteen shows?
Oh, I have no idea. I wish I had his number.
Well, that would be that would absolutely be the winner.
Yeah, but there's probably like other people that I don't think about that are not in sports, but well, I don't know. Jalen Brunson would probably be the one right now. But again, like I don't think that's a big deal. But I could get why other people would think. That's kind of what happens. Like you kind of lose that factor. I think the last person I was intimidated that I interviewed was Michael Jordan. So.
Yeah, there's been a few. Jordan is one, and then seeing Bill Murray when he sang the seventh inning stretch. The seventh inning stretch singers at Wrigley were always the ones that stopped me. The athletes, except for Jordan, not really. But yeah, Bill Murray, and I'm a middle-aged white guy, so George Wendt, Norm from Cheers, like the important ones in society.
Like I remember when I saw Snoop Dogg at like the Olympics, I was like, that's cool.
Yeah, the when people used to come on campus at ESPN, that was pretty wild. You'd randomly walk down a hallway.
I'm now really thinking hard about this.
Jessica Alba would roll in, and then next day would be Snoop, and you're like, where am I? So.
Yeah, I think it would have to be somebody outside of sports for me to be like, whoa, at this point, right? Because like the sports people are just
what you're used to.
They're just people.
Yeah. Well, I cannot thank you enough, Dana, for doing this, for the latest episode of What's Your Story? Dana O'Neill, everybody.
Thank you.